Welcome back, everybody, for episode 7 of Behind the Raise. And today we have a very, very exciting episode prepared for you. Our first non-founder guest, VirtualAd's own Danielle Fobert, our head of design, is joining us to discuss all of the design elements and the psychology behind creative that converts investors. And so we have an action-packed episode here going through different design elements, some of the psychological principles around our ad design, and some of the core components around messaging, some advice for founders as well, and ultimately what we see working in our ads today. So Danielle, welcome to the pod. It's great to have you on. And maybe for the benefit of our viewers and our listeners, maybe you could give them a little bit of background into your role, your history at VirtualAd, and how you came to be where you are right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. Yeah, it's happy to be on the show. Looking forward to hopefully future features as well, depending on how this one goes. But yeah, so here at VirtualAd, I'm head of design. So pretty much I've been with VirtualAd for 4 pushing 5 shortly in about a week, years. It's been a long, wild ride, but it's definitely been kind of the best role I've been in for a while. Just going a little bit into the past, I graduated from OCAD in 2018 and was lucky enough to kind of jump out of school and right into work at a more traditional out-of-home kind of sign shop. And then from there went client side and was focusing on in-house creative for a long time, and then kind of went out of client side to go into more agency. And that's when I joined VirtualAd, and it's just been smooth sailing since.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, knowing that you're coming up now on your 5th year anniversary, I definitely want to hype you up a little bit more as well. And I will just let the audience know that Danielle is basically like a prolific content creator and designer and is able to handle a ton of volume and a lot of tasks, and has been with us. I almost want to say since day one. It hasn't been like total day one, but you've been with us through a number of different iterations before we, fully landed in the capital raise space. And I think like each one of those phases has been such a key learning. And I think it's also been great seeing your evolution as a designer, because I think when you did come in, it was like a skill set, kind of like you said, it was largely more design based and not necessarily that direct response, or like you had that capability and that background. But I feel like I've really seen you grow and evolve into being able to create these awesome direct response ads, and also just take on a lot of new challenges as this space continues to change. Like even I think when we started, it was a lot of image ads, and now it's like a lot of videos.
Yeah.
So that's been great to see. And you've been such an integral part of the team, and everybody that's worked with you always has such great things to say. It's no surprise that you're coming onto your 5th year now.
We've definitely been through a lot of changes. And even like you were saying, kind of even just the environment around paid media has changed so much over the last few years. So I think that's kind of feeding into why we've had to go through so many iterations essentially to get to where we are for clients.
Yeah, exactly. Like when TikTok became a thing, I was like, okay, it's like we're going to be doing so much video from now on. And I think that's probably one of the things we'll touch on today, is like how well we see that working. But yeah, let's get into a little bit on the ad side of things and help the viewers understand what's kind of working from a design perspective, and ultimately what you see coming up often in these high converting ads. So, one of the things that I often hear from founders when they hop on their first calls with us, or, they really start buying into the process, eventually they're always asking like, what are we going to talk about? And what are we like going to say to people in these ads that we're doing? And I think that you have an interesting viewpoint when you start off with clients, just even from onboarding, right? Because you're often taking them from this brand phase where they've really maybe focused on like their website, they've focused on building out investor decks, but they haven't fully made that transition to communicating to a broader audience about their raise. And so when you sort of step into that, what are some of the common misunderstandings that you see founders having about creative, and what they think will be working when they make that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of like what you said. They come from the branding side and mostly focusing on like awareness in that point. But for conversion friendly ads, really, I think the biggest misunderstanding is founders want to put a lot of information up front center and kind of get everything out there. But when we're building these ads, the intention is really more just to get attention long enough to kind of transfer them further down the funnel where more information starts to build from there. So I'd say so most ads, when we initially get going, we keep them kind of bare, not too much giving away. And I think the first round of feedback, or something that usually has to be kind of discussed with the first round, is that the ads aren't being built as kind of a mini pitch deck. It's more supposed to be just a big attention grab that we can then feed the rest of the information later once they're already kind of compelled into what we're potentially going to tell them.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's not like you're not trying to find an ad that is going to, somebody sees it and they're like, oh, that's perfect. I got to invest 50K right now. There's no silver bullet of an ad. Maybe there's a couple, but that takes a lot of time. But it's more so, like you said, you want to take people to the next step. So build enough curiosity that people want to essentially leave their scrolling experience and go to the landing page, for example. So it's less about a silver bullet and more so about that, like building the curiosity to get to the next step.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you try to over explain, especially in the ads, with the attention stopping time you have is really, really short. So if you try to over explain too much, it becomes like convoluted and then people end up just scrolling past anyways. So just having that one big point that we can grab attention, pique curiosity, interest, emotion, maybe, depending on kind of how we're working on this side. But anything that's can kind of drive a lot of just instant reaction versus kind of trying to digest information, that's further down the line.
So yeah, you're not trying to go through the whole PowerPoint in like 15 seconds, but more so leading with maybe the strongest point. And that kind of actually is a good segue into something that we often reference, which is this hook, story, and offer format. And I was wondering if maybe you could share and explain what that is and why it's important to think about when founders are thinking of either like maybe making some ads, or when we're explaining to them what type of ad formats work. How would you explain that hook, story, offer format?
Yeah. So I'd say the titling is pretty self-explanatory. So we try to break down ads, video, static, carousel, even kind of going into emails and landing page through the same structure of hook, story, offer. And essentially the way it works is the first thing that the user, customer, investor needs to see is something interesting. And so that's kind of what we were talking about with the 3-second attention grabber, something that will make them stop the scroll, stop going through kind of their feed and through all the other photos that they're seeing. It's something that can really grab attention and then at least hold tight to then when we feed into the story. So story is more where we get into the little bit of the explanation, but still not giving away too much. But here's really where we start to explain into or leading into the offer. So this is usually, we try to do it with a little bit of craft and art, not necessarily too blunt, but it's really there to kind of direct towards what we're looking to get from the user out of the ad. So it's booking a meeting, just going to checkout, kind of learning more. It's just feed into that offer. And so the story is really where the emotion starts to build after we pique curiosity. And then finally the offer, that's mostly the call to action there. So we try to be really direct on this segment where it is book a call or invest today or learn more. It's very direct. So there's no question of, okay, I'm interested, now what? We try to keep the kind of bottom portion of the ad, I'd say, or that last piece, very informative and direct. So there's no question really.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you can get really wrapped up in the hook and the story, and sometimes the call to action can fall off the map because you've done like such a good job of explaining the first part that you're like, oh, like they'll just naturally do this last part. But I find it is important to have that call to action because it almost anchors the next step. Like I feel like when people, if you've done a good job with the ad, people aren't necessarily clicking through to be like, hey, I got to book a call. They're more so clicking through to be like, okay, I need a little bit more information. But then when they see that call to action on the landing page, you're like, oh yeah, I've actually seen this, call action before. So I kind of feel like it's more of an anchoring tool than it is an immediate action tool. but it's definitely still important to include in the ad. And I'm always a sucker for a good hook, and I wonder if there's any that like my personal favorites are like the really contrarian ones where people do like a very abrupt pattern interrupt, or they kind of have a contrarian take on a common topic. Is there like a particular hook format that you like or feel like it works either visually or, messaging wise? What type of format do you like to follow or particularly like in this instance?
Yeah, I'd say going for hooks, we have a couple that are more visual based, but then leading into kind of the interest peak, and I think coming from the contrarian or maybe more the pain point, like negative point of view, it definitely is a pattern interrupt, and it will kind of stop people from like the incessant scroll kind of through social media. But coming at something with like strong passion or like strong passion against as well has worked really well. So if you have something that we kind of can go up against, like a major problem that's out there, and it's something that everyone is aware of, but it's something you can speak to, that's a huge hook kind of potential there. And so you can kind of work that into like a variety of different variations going forward, build out full kind of concept branches from that. But visually, some other hooks we try to use are like the big numbers. Obviously, that's a huge one because it's very to the point, and it's the interest peak of the what am I going to get out of it point of view. So that's something that we definitely use when we can. Aside from that, some other ones like going kind of into the contrarian is using the personality. So if there's a big personality with the brand, definitely we try to lead with that as a visual hook. And so it's using some of their vernacular coming from like the founder's side. They definitely know their business the best. So any little quips or one-offs that we can get from founders specifically that we can then kind of repurpose, and it shows who they are and kind of who the company's about. We always try to utilize those. And then of course, like founder faces or any face really. But founder faces are a big driver, especially for trust. And so that hook there people are used to seeing faces and they like to see faces. So being able to show a face as a visual hook definitely works.
Yeah, I feel like nowadays the being able to hop on camera is such an essential part of it because it can be so easy to hide behind brand or be able to just like, make a statement if you're just kind of putting a visual graphic out there, and people need to see that vulnerability and they need to see that person because it builds such a high level of trust, especially when we're talking about the investment space or companies that people haven't heard of yet. Is like they need to see that individual, somebody that's going to stand behind their words. I feel like is so important. And we have a ton of examples of that. I know we're going to like talk about it in a little bit, so I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I do feel like that's a really important piece.
Yeah, for sure. Like we've been on client calls where they bring up that people call in and go, I want to speak to so and so I saw in the video. And so from that point of view, being out there, it's people really want to invest in you, in the founder, in the person. Kind of that's where the trust is really built. Even if the opportunity is amazing, if there's no trust between person to person, it's kind of hard to get to that next step. So being able to show yourself, kind of speak to investors or clients or customers, it's huge. It's definitely a major trust factor.
I love that because you're doing a good job in your messaging when people literally want to talk to you because they've seen you on an ad. And I've actually had that experience too, where I've seen ads for people a bunch of times, and then I've actually like called or had a call set up with them, and I actually end up talking to the person. I was like, wow, I feel like I'm talking to a mini celebrity. It's so funny, but it definitely works, and there's a benefit to that. But kind of on that point, I want to follow this line of thinking a little bit further, because in some of the examples you'll bring up, we have the robotics company that we worked with, and I thought that was like a really interesting example of the power of putting yourself out there, and also the founder story, which you'll touch on a little bit later as well. But the robotics case study was super interesting because the robots themselves are so attention grabbing and like really quite honestly a great hook. So you could almost ride ad performance based on the robots, but I felt like over time it almost became a little too dehumanized and depersonalized. And when we're looking to raise funds, it's like we're also were battling the misconception that these robots were taking jobs, which they weren't. They were actually just helping. And there's so much automation and machinery on farms already. Like that's not what they were doing at all. But there was a misconception of that. And I felt like if we didn't insert the human narrative, and the founders weren't super keen on being in the ads because one, they were super busy and it wasn't just something they were used to doing, but they were very charismatic and like really great to talk to. So I was like, you guys are gonna be great in ads. And I found that it did make a big difference when they were able to hop behind the camera and be very candid. Like I thought that it was such a stark difference between just showing videos and photos of robots versus having the actual founder speak behind them. It's like almost made the robots friendlier to me.
Yeah, and even with the little smiley faces. But for sure, especially in that particular situation, the founder story, it was a powerful and an emotional one. So coming from that side, being able to share that, like you were saying, just share it. Because even if we ran statics where we kind of explained the history and like the reason for founding, having founder on camera kind of explain it themselves, and you can see the emotion resonate within them, it really speaks a lot stronger than anything else that we could produce.
Hearing it from the founder directly is such a huge difference. And oftentimes people, especially when we're thinking of the investor and startups, or it doesn't even need to be a startup, you could just be running a fund, but ultimately, they want to know the leader as well, what the leadership is like, and there's kind of two components. So there's that one founder's story, which if it's a really good story, it helps to have a very strong why for the company. So they'll understand that like, hey, if there's some, hard times or tough decisions to be made, like this is the key principles that this company is founded on. And if those are really strong, that's going to resonate with people. And then the second is, that vulnerability as the founder to actually get behind and stand behind their words and put themselves out there. And I think like a big thing is surviving the comments section and just like not caring and just like putting yourself out there and being bold is such a huge step for the founders to make. And we've always seen those ads do well.
Yeah, and exactly to like what you were saying, having the backbone and the principles. Every company has them, and it's just kind of a matter of getting out there and being able to speak them to the right people. Like if you have a company that you've built and you care for and you're going to ride it out, it's being able to communicate that to especially investors and kind of that know that there's a strong presence behind the wheel, and it's going to keep maintaining even if things get rough out there. There is, or if things get really, really good, there's no worry kind of who you are investing with or who you're working with.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also like to one of your earlier points, they're really effective at communicating the emotional piece of it, which we've seen, different clients that we've worked with. And so I thought in the robotics example, they had like a pretty strong emotional story. Thinking a little bit about real estate client that we're working with, which is like less of an emotional industry. Like it's hard to get emotional about real estate, but I still think he does a good job because he's very passionate. And so
Exactly.
about like certain ways of investing and guiding people along and like sort of casting light on certain areas and he's so passionate about that. The founder is really that communicator for the emotion, I find as well.
Yeah, that's the other definitely major example there, especially with the passion that comes for necessarily, I guess, some of the negative aspects of the industry. Being able to come out pretty hard against something, it's something where when someone sees it and if they're kind of feeling even just like a twinge of that same kind of frustration or pain, kind of hearing that founder yell about it in ads, it's a huge stop. Like people want to stay around, listen, kind of hear what's making him so upset, why he's so angry about this. And then also the solution that is posed, kind of post addressing, I guess, the elephant in the room when it's in that industry.
Yeah. I think that's a good point too, is like people are attracted to strong opinions and it's always like a bit of a risk that you might alienate some people. I don't think that's as big of a risk as people think it is, but generally like that's a scroll stopping kind of, I would say, position to take. Like if you're very opinionated, people are going to be like, oh, what's this guy saying? It's a good hook for sure. Okay, so I want to bring us into some of our best performing ad creative, and you sharing some of your thoughts around what's been working on that side of things, and to share a couple of examples and kind of walk through some best practices and what you're seeing for some of our best performing ads. So maybe you could walk us through a couple of examples that speak to some of the principles that you had on the, the design side. And yeah, so feel free to walk us through some of these observations of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think some of these things are kind of aspects that we addressed slightly earlier. So I'd say are kind of breaking these out into 3 groups. First one is definitely a big number. So large number, we have 2 top performers here and their variations, well, at least one variation kind of per. But the huge numbers, especially when it's in investing and we have kind of returns or even past performance or anything like that, we can kind of really anchor on. That's a huge stop. And so what we like to do is blow it up as big as possible, because I would say a big trend recently has been to go teeny, teeny, tiny with text. And I think people view it as coming across as luxurious or more professional or sophisticated. But I'd say at the end of the day, it's really about attention grabbing. So depending on kind of what you're going after, it definitely can work to your benefit of being more, I guess, aloof and like really, really tiny and kind of sophisticated in that luxury approach. But to really grab attention on these social platforms where there's so many people competing all the time for everything, we like just to blow up numbers, text, anything, get as big as possible, as bold as possible, but still maintaining, I guess, enough white space where it's not overcrowded. So overcrowded not only with elements on the actual design, but even in train of thought. We try to stick to one bit per ad and kind of break it up. So for these ads in particular, we focus on one piece. So it's either the returns or the track record. We're not trying to include the returns and the track record and also any other aspects of what you could get, or like adding in a minimum investment. It's another piece that you could add in, and it definitely can still be included, maybe not in the visual. Maybe we would to kind of save that for primary text or something else. But to keep these visuals bold, we stick to just one train of thought and just kind of maintain that focus.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is like there's always a ton to communicate in these opportunities, but focusing on like choosing a piece to focus on is important. And how do you ultimately decide what to prioritize? Because it can be difficult for, I think, founders sometimes to choose that, because, somebody might come in and be like, actually, it's the fact that there's a very minimal hold on the funds that is what investors really love. But that might not always be the hook. So how do you decide what you get, what you'll be focusing on?
Yeah. So I think that finding out what particularly drives investors' interest is something that we definitely find out when we do our Spark testing, where we take kind of all the messaging, break them out into these very, very siloed creatives, and then kind of see which performs best and then move on from there. But when founder comes in with kind of, like you were saying, like, I think it's the 6-month hold, or I think it's the equity, or kind of whatever aspect they want to focus on, it still comes down to, we will try to break it out into these ad pieces where it's only focusing on one, and then kind of see which performs best. And it doesn't mean we're going to no longer talk about liquidity or equity or anything like that. It's just kind of what becomes the focus there. So typically we just base it on kind of performance and the data that we can look at, see what is driving conversions and what people, maybe it's still an important factor, but it's not like the most interesting piece. So that might be something that we don't necessarily run in the visuals, but we still keep it in the primary copy, and we still keep it in the emails and the landing page. So it's still out there, but it's just not the attention grabber.
Got it. So for these examples, for the listeners that are not, seeing them, but a good description of them is that we're highlighting some of the like larger numbers when it comes to these funds. In particular, these ones are speaking to returns. I think this also goes back to what you said earlier, Danielle, where we're just trying to get people to that next step. So there's not a ton that's explained about like the actual company itself in these particular ads, but the numbers and the statements are bold enough that people are going to be like, I want to find out more about this. So they're going into that next step. And it's almost like you're taking a less is more approach in a way.
Yeah, for sure. Because like when I think we said it a few times, but yeah, it really is just to stop them and then hopefully just get them engaged enough to keep moving on, even if that next step necessarily isn't a click, but maybe it's just reading the whole primary text, or at least skimming the primary text, and then hopefully you can get a click and then keep going from there. But I'd say the information definitely, it builds up kind of as they move along.
Yeah, nice. All right, what else you got for us?
All right, so next batch is definitely kind of the bolder side of things. So here is kind of where we're attempting to do the pattern interrupt. We can achieve that in various different ways. So here's kind of an example from the robotics company, and something that we were leaning on that was working, pretty much working until it stopped working, was kind of the ability to tie it back to something larger that people already recognize. So we were running with the Tesla of farming, which it worked really well until it kind of started to teeter off. But it's essentially being able to tie it back, like being able to have the potential investor reference it to something that they already know, and then kind of make that tie there for what the offering is, kind of how we're framing ourselves.
Yeah, that association is helpful, especially when it's a new space and it's like very difficult to explain, like autonomous agricultural robots that operate in swarms and, do XYZ. It's like, okay, well, let's use an association so that people can quickly build a frame of reference and then try to, and again, like go to that next step. Like there's ultimately, I think that one was a video, but the hook was strong enough that even if you just had it in like an image, people would be like, okay, I'm curious to learn more about this.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think we did use it for statics going forward, and used it for headlines, and kind of pretty much pushed everywhere that we could, because it was the ability, like the weight that was carried kind of through the reference.
Nice. Any other examples that you wanted to show us?
Yeah, so aside from kind of using that anchor point, the other ones are, we have some like visual hooks as well. So it's the banks move slow, investors can't. Here we're obviously referencing Tortoise and the Hare. This one, it was a pretty big top performer for the client. So we did end up using the same sentiment, kind of repeated a few times in some different variations. Here, it's the ad isn't too crazy in really any way. It's just, once again, the kind of big bold text right in your face to kind of stop the scroll, hopefully, and then sticking to one train of thought, one point. We're not going anywhere else. We're not kind of explaining anything beyond just this one piece that this company operates very fast, which investors need, especially in a real estate space.
Nice. Yeah, I think that was a really good example. Yeah, what's this final one here?
Yeah, so this one, it definitely is an older one. I think it's kind of a way back. But this one was a top performer that kind of lingered for years as a top performer, and then got lots of variations built off this. But this was the original piece. And so here, this one's just essentially a bold statement. Like there's not too much going on visually. It's more the framing of just directly speaking to the kind of the user of, I know what you're looking for, and I know your pain points, and we have the solution. And it's very to the point in that sense. So even for here, the visual hook isn't really having anything too over the top, being too bold. It's, I guess, more being bold in the sense of not saying too much. We're not going over the top. There is no face. There's no real background image. It's just the message is enough that just kind of putting it out there with white space can stop, and it resonates enough with people that they want to kind of learn more from there.
I think this was like a really good example of getting to understand the customer. If I remember correctly, we had gone through some basically like first party research or survey questions that the client had provided. And I'll just kind of describe the ad a little bit here, but we worked this eventually into some of the core messaging, but I believe it started as an image ad, and it was targeting people interested in real estate investing. But it says, but are you interested in real estate investing, but don't have the money, time, or confidence to get started? We got you covered. And so it's interesting because not really mentioning what the client does, not really mentioning that there's like some branding in there, but there's actually not a huge sell on the client side. But I feel like it really strikes at the heart of how that particular customer persona felt about getting started. And it was often that they lacked confidence, or they didn't have the money or the time. And that was really the key part, is that that was how that audience was feeling. There was a lot of different messaging that was used over time that kind of maybe it was like a little bit more instructional or more market based, but I felt like this really struck at the emotional side of how that audience felt.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially coming in with the pain points, like money and time, everybody kind of feels that as a pain point, but the confidence portion of it, I think for this particular client was a huge piece of kind of going forward with the messaging, like you were saying, as a huge building block for the way that we targeted like all the personas really.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And actually it's a good point because I think this ad came up over time and then it eventually became like part of the core messaging where we're like, oh, this is the one. This is the one that's like really working here.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, we have full campaigns based essentially on variations of this. So
That's right. I know that you had another section, but we did talk about it a little bit more in detail. We skipped ahead a little bit talking about kind of the founder and using a face and personality. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on that, or do you feel like we kind of covered a lot of the main points a little bit earlier?
I mean, I would say for the founder pieces, look, of course, like we said, having just your visual there, just have your face is a huge piece. It also goes into like also some potential trust points of just kind of platforms. So a lot of what we try to utilize isn't just necessarily like DTC, but also if we can use clips from like speaking events or really any event or something like that, that helps also build social proof. That's a great use of kind of the founder face and story as well.
Nice. And then in terms of like the founder, would you say that, how would you describe to them, or we have a couple photos here. I think some of them are screen grabs from videos. Would you say like, would you push them towards doing video, photos, etc.? Like what's your preference?
Definitely, I would say video, because I think most founders, we have pictures that we can kind of source already. But I say for marketing specifically, like even especially looking for investors, video is definitely the most important piece. And they don't have to be polished. Like a lot of these examples here being shown right now are pretty polished and they're professional. But we have some other ones where it's more kind of as iPhone videos, essentially. It's just holding the camera up and recording. A lot of it, especially, is just right off the cuff. Like when we work with founders, we'll usually provide scripts, but most of them are just bullet points of kind of things that we'd like to have mentioned. But a lot of it, it's just really your understanding of the business and being able to speak to it as naturally as possible because you understand it better than anybody. So it's a really just videos, hopping on, recording like 15, 30, like even a minute video, because I definitely know you can keep going for a minute or longer, but just getting behind the camera and really kind of, or I guess in front of the camera and just kind of letting loose for video content is definitely key.
Those are like my favorite videos. It's just when the founder just grabs a phone and goes off, and they honestly end up being the best. And it's like, I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it's just the level of comfort that it builds with the audience where it's like, oh wow, this person just kind of can speak to this very naturally. And I always find those are good. So yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and I think when it comes to like the image ad versus video, it's like the image ad works well if that person has fairly large following and they're recognizable. But if you're not at that stage yet, you will, have to be hopping, making some videos. That's what you need to do. I'm just going to move us to a couple of these like final questions here. So what's one thing a founder could do, this week to make their creative noticeably stronger? Like what would you recommend for them?
Yeah, so I think the next step to really take, like even if I'm doing it yourself right now, is kind of what we just mentioned. Just kind of getting on camera and saying, really, there's a couple things that you can speak to, but it's the main point is really just to get on camera and just be talking. But definitely, I think the main things to be speaking to are kind of who this investment is for. If we're kind of speaking from a raise point of view, it's kind of who you're targeting, maybe who's not a good fit, so people can kind of self-qualify right away. And that's a quick video to do. History, like background, reason behind the fund, like we were saying as well, kind of being able to have that backbone and the principle to why you're doing it. And then other ones as well is kind of tackling like main pain points and big questions that investors, maybe even investors that are currently investing, have. Just being able to tackle a question before they get on the call so that they already have that understanding. It's huge, and it really helps build the investor kind of base when you're moving into actually getting the funds, there's way less questions and they're a lot more comfortable kind of with the process going forward.
Nice. That's definitely a good tip. That's awesome. That's great advice. All right, got a couple rapid fire questions for you here.
Okay.
What is one tool that you can't live without in your world right now?
I'd say right now it's definitely kind of some of the new features in Adobe. So Photoshop's generative fill is huge, especially for kind of getting the most out of assets. So even if we have image assets that work really well, being able to quickly kind of reshape and expand to utilize them in more platforms is huge. I hate saying this, but it's a massive piece of kind of how we continue with the variations and different kind of dimensions we need for all platforms. And then aside from that, Illustrator just came out with Turntable, which I think is going to be a really big piece kind of for statics, and kind of being able to take elements that we're using and continue to use them across different platforms without necessarily having to totally redesign, but just be able to kind of repurpose. So that's really it.
Nice. I feel like there's so many new tools popping up, so it's good to see Photoshop still like in the game and competing because yeah, there's a lot of new stuff out there. So that's great. And would love to hear a Danielle Fobert hot take on where you see design going over the next little bit, or just a general hot take in terms of like the stuff that we work on.
Okay, hot take. Say it's kind of okay. Well, it's not too hot, I guess, because we've kind of been dancing around it. But I definitely say ugly ads work as long as they have the right hook. So that's even what we were like. And ugly doesn't mean hideous, but doesn't mean pixel perfect. So like the iPhone cameras is something especially. It doesn't have to be a full film set for an ad to really perform. And same with even when we're going into statics, kind of keeping statics more, I guess, general or vernacular and not overly designed. Because I think when they get overly designed, people just scroll right past them. So kind of keeping things looking natural, but as long as they have a really good hook, it's a huge attention grab, and it really doesn't matter what it looks like.
Yeah, I like that. The don't judge an ugly ad by its cover. And you never know until it's out there. And there's something about the rawness of that approach, which again, people appreciate. And I just like that when founders don't overthink it too much and it's very authentic and you just got to sometimes put it out there. But I agree with you. It's not to say that like pretty ads don't work either. Like those work as well, but you don't always have to, you have to be able to experiment, I would say. Keep your options and opinions open. What do you think if there's something issuers should start doing now that, if a new client was to come in or a founder was to be like, hey, Danielle, like, how do I improve my ads? What's something I should start doing?
Okay, we're gonna be beating a dead horse here, but I think again, it's really faces. If we can have a face behind the brand, it carries it way more than a logo could. People being social creatures, we like seeing faces, we like seeing eyes, and people talking to us. So I think that's really the main thing. It's just being able to kind of connect with people on a face-to-face basis. And people like to see it. So videos, photos, even like having a more personal feed as well. Just being that social side is huge, and so it really is kind of getting on video, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's kind of it's the new era, and you do see the company of the leadership of companies. They are just a lot more present nowadays. They're not like hiding in a boardroom, and yeah, so hopefully, when issuers come in and speak with us after seeing this episode, they'll be ready to hop behind the camera and make some good ads. Do you have a hot take or prediction for the next 12 months in terms of where you see design and messaging going?
The next 12 months, well, okay, so I mean, it's gonna sound like I'm repeating myself. Yeah, right. 12 months. Well, I'd say kind of with the way that kind of AI tools are going, production quantity, it definitely it's kind of helped it expand so much. You're able to get things out a lot faster. On that, however, on the flip side, to put kind of target audiences do matter. And I would say if you're skewing on the younger side, and younger doesn't mean like teens, but even just kind of on the early adult side of life, AI, very obvious AI is becoming hated, I'd say. And so it's even with these tools being out there, I think going forward, the next 12 months, it's really going to be a shift back into kind of knowing when and where to use it and how to use it. So really obvious AI, it turns people off a lot, but at the same time, it's useful for production quantity and being able to kind of get a faster turnaround on things. So it's more, I think the next 12 months you're gonna see a lot of people either totally turning away from it or at least saying they're turning away from it. And then kind of you'll see a higher quality come out where it won't be so in your face and it will kind of continue to feel like made content.
That's such a good point, and I feel like that could be like a whole episode in and of itself. But it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out over time because I find that it can be really obvious when people use AI for ads and it's like not really good, but then sometimes it can be really good if they use a really good idea and you're like, oh wow, that only could be done via AI. So, but it's a high bar and it's tough. It's tough to meet, but I think that's a really good point. It'd be interesting to watch like the backlash if there's gonna, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it also comes if you're gonna really lean into AI to the point where like, okay, that's AI. I think it comes into your presence of it, of not trying to hide it and pretend it's not. There's a lot of brands out there, they're running like you were saying, like over the top extreme ads that are all kind of made by AI, but they're leaning into it. It's not straying away from it or trying to hide it. It's kind of going into it as the way the world is right now. It's just going to keep growing and becoming a larger part of everyday life. So it's just going to be embracing it in the right way.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like one of the like if you're trying to hide it, it's not great, but if it's very obvious, it's like people people will respect you for it for just putting it out there. But yeah, it's gonna be super interesting to watch. A lot of good hot takes in there, and yeah, I think just for this episode in general, a ton of gems and a lot of key insights for founders here in terms of how they can start to think about creative and understanding what converts from an audience perspective. So thank you, Danielle, for all of your insights today and for joining us. And to our audience, we'll see you on the next one.
So yeah, thanks, Martin. I was happy to be a special guest and looking forward to future episodes. Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, see you later. All right.